I'm Dan Langan and I can make anything out of cake. Every week, Food Network challenges me to a brand new cake baking challenge. This is Dan Can Bake It. And I've got this week's coming in hot, right here. Brand new box, fresh from Food Network. I'm gonna open it up and see what's inside. Food, it's pizza night, bread, pasta. Ooh, ice cream sandwiches, yes, solid choice. Let's see. Create an out-of-control cake inspired by Flavortown. I got it, Flavortown, Guy's Grocery Games, Guy's like a Food Network staple. And now I get why this whole thing came in on a grocery cart, because it's grocery games, right? Flavortown is like a gigantic grocery store, like the grocery store of everybody's dreams. Fruits and produce and meats and floral section, they have all kinds of stuff. So I definitely have a lot of options here. I do love making giant food cakes. It's kind of like my thing. So I think I could have a lot of fun with this. I think I'm gonna make a giant food cake, why not? I think I'm actually gonna do some research for this one. I'm gonna Google Guy's favorite fruits and vegetables, and maybe I'll pick one of those and I'll turn it into a cake. What I'm gonna do is create this vanilla cake with red sprinkles and fresh raspberry buttercream, pipe mounds of raspberry buttercream, and then spray the entire thing with a red chocolate spray. Modeling chocolate to make the stem and leaves have a gigantic, out of control raspberry cake. What I did earlier was take a bunch of quarter sheet cakes that had some red sprinkles baked into them. And I used raspberry buttercream to fill them up. I'm gonna use this cake to carve the raspberry shape. I wanna kind of figure out what I want the shape to be. So I know it'll point in the front, then it's gonna be rounded in the back. So I think the first thing that I'll do is start taking off some cake from the back, taper back in. This is kind of a really, really rough shape. I just want the back of this cake just a little bit higher, so I'm actually gonna cheat and take some of my scraps and just kind of use some buttercream to attach them into place to keep my cake scraps around before just like chucking them in a bowl or something. If I need to build up or fill out any of the spots, I can just use the extra cake. Just kind of want to sketch out a circle, that like characteristic raspberry indentation. I don't want to take out too much at once. Maybe I'll just put a little bit of buttercream here and see if I can plump this up a little bit. So I actually think this looks pretty good. There are a few gaps, but I think when I add my crumb coat, I can kind of fill this in and then I'll use the buttercream to really get it rounded out. And I'll just grab a piece of plastic wrap, kind of compress everything down and really work on that rounded shape. So when I grab my buttercream, it's a little bit easier to smooth the buttercream and it won't drag around as many crumbs. So I'll peel this off. I'll just load the top of this cake up with buttercream. So now I just want to go in for a crumb coat. To make this raspberry buttercream, it's actually really simple. I just take raspberry puree, I add it to my vanilla buttercream and whip it up. It's delicious, it's refreshing, and I love the color. My favorite tool here, this plastic smoother. And I'll just spend a second kind of in the center. Just want to make sure it's nice and rounded. I'm pretty happy with this now. The shape is actually going to change when I go to the next step, which is piping on some rounded mounds of this buttercream. But before I do that, I got to give this a trip to the fridge. So I'm going to put this in the fridge and I'll let it hang out. So now that this massive cake is finally chilled, that crumb coat is chilled, I can get to adding those bumps or kind of those juice pockets that are on a raspberry. I'm actually just going to use buttercream in a bag with an open tip. I'm just going to pipe mounds of buttercream just like this, and I'll leave this center space open. I'll kind of offset these so that the next row fills in the spaces that I created with the first row. Perfect. Chill this whole thing, get it nice and cold. Then I can kind of go back and smooth down these bumps. So my cake should be nice and cold by now. I'm gonna grab it out of the fridge and I can start smoothing out that buttercream. What happened when I piped this, I ended up getting this little point on each mounds of buttercream. And I like to use vodka here because the vodka, it evaporates quicker than water. Kind of press these in and just smooth them out. I don't want the cake to end up being wet. Buttercream's wet, I can't spray chocolate over it. I need the chocolate to stick to the buttercream really nicely, so vodka evaporates and then the chocolate can stick. So now that all of my buttercream is smoothed out, what I wanna do is spray this whole cake with a chocolate spray. I'll take my cake, which is really cold, and I'll put it right on top of my turntable. So I have a big board here that's gonna protect my counter space from the overspray from my chocolate. Got my chocolate spray mix, which is warm from the oven. I actually make this stuff just with those colored candy coins that you get from the craft store, and then I thin those down with some vegetable shortening so that it's thin enough to pass through this paint sprayer, which I actually just got from the hardware store. I'll turn this on. I just like to use these colored candy coins because they're so accessible. And what's really cool is that when the chocolate hits the cold cake, it kind of beads up and hardens and it makes this really cool velvet technique. See what I mean? I mean, how cool is that? It's literally just melted down chocolate through a spray paint gun. And when it hits the cake, it makes this really cool texture, kind of like the hairiness of raspberry. So I think it's a really great technique, especially for this cake. To create the stem and leaves, my team rolled out some light green modeling chocolate and cut out a leaf shape. Then they used a leaf impression tool to create some realistic texture on the leaves. To make the stem, all they did was roll out some green modeling chocolate and it looked just like a raspberry stem. I've got my modeling chocolate pieces for the top ready to go. I have some lime green petal dust right here. This is basically just powdered food color. Just a little kiss of color, nothing too crazy. I just want to bring out that texture. Just make sure everything's really blended. And I'll just take a skewer and I just want to fish just onto the stem, just a little bit. So I'll give this just a kiss to this color. So I'll grab my cake, take the stem, and I really like these two curled pieces right here, so I'm gonna put those right towards the top. And I'll take my skewer, and that's gonna hold my stem, and it's also gonna hold those leaves in place. So I'll just press this whole thing down. So this stem's actually falling back just a little bit. I think some piping gel should make it sticky enough to hold it in place, so let me see. Yes, it looks just like a real raspberry. Food Network challenged me to create an out-of-control cake inspired by Flavortown. I used vanilla cake with red sprinkles and fresh raspberry buttercream. I used modeling chocolate to make the stem and leaves. And now I have a gigantic, out-of-control raspberry cake. And I definitely think this looks like a nice, juicy, plump raspberry. So I can't wait to get a slice of it. I'm gonna go in right here. I love the texture that I got from the buttercream and the chocolate spray. I love using fondant for sculpted cakes, but whenever I can experiment with a different technique, I really like to do that. Oh man, looks like a good one. That is a nice slice of cake. There is something so satisfying about a nice tart buttercream, that fresh raspberry flavor. This is definitely a cake that I think Guy would love to have in Flavortown. Don't forget to subscribe to Food Network and let me know in the comments what you want my next challenge to be. I'm gonna be reading them.